Hi, y'all. It's lovely to meet y'all and to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to stop my video just for bandwidth purposes and share my screen. So 1 second. All right. Can everyone see my screen okay?
It looks great. Yep, I see your slide.
Awesome. So I'll be presenting today on our Great Lakes Spatial Mapping Priority Study with a focus on Lake Superior. Before I begin, I'd like to give thanks to some of our collaborators and coordinators, specifically Lyndon Brinks and Xiaofan Zhang, who both contributed a lot to this project in terms of gathering participants, running analysis, etc. And I'd also love to thank Peter Esselman, Brandon Crumweed, and my boss, Ashley Chappell. So I'm going to talk a little bit about an introduction to our study. What is it? What are we trying to do? I'll talk a little bit about how this has been used in the past, and then I'll go into the results of this study and how they can be used to help people identify mapping partners. So what we're focusing on is mapping in oceans and Great Lakes. Mapping progress in US waters is fairly limited as of 2021. About 50% of coastal ocean and Great Lakes waters are currently unmapped. And there are significant gaps in the Great Lakes. About 95% of the Great Lakes are unmapped based on our IOCM progress report. That's a huge number, and we really want to make it easier for different mapping agencies to find the resources they need in order to map the Great Lakes. And when we say mapping, we mean this in a really broad sense. Some people think that because we're NOAA, we only care about like bathymetry and like, depth and so on. But when we're talking about mapping, we mean all kinds of mapping, not just bathymetry, but, substrate characterization, photographs, water column characterization, all sorts of things. So here's just another map of some of the current bathymetry data that exists for the Great Lakes. As you can tell, it's fairly limited. As for this project, there's been long-time coordination on mapping projects within the Great Lakes with partners from the Great Lakes Observing System, the Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory, the USGS, and other groups really working together to try and get mapping goals met. But there's still significant gaps in the Great Lakes, and that's where this study comes in. By the way, if anyone has any questions, I can't see the chat, but you're more than welcome to like ask them during the presentation or hold until the end, whatever you prefer. So what is the spatial priority study? The study is a assessment that asks different mapping partners across the US where are your mapping interests, along with some information about their mapping interests. And it uses an online application to get this information. And so what it does is it allows different organizations to identify and share their priorities in a consistent way. So you can see a screenshot of the application in a different part of the US here on the right. That here is just in the Southeast, but it can give you a gauge of like how this application looks and how it works. So the goal of the study is to collect this data from different stakeholder organizations and to create outlines of where each organization has mapping needs and interests. Where does USGS have mapping needs? Where does NOAA have mapping needs? Where does the state of Michigan have mapping needs? And to be able to create those outlines so that we can see where there are overlaps between different groups. And so that will help support, better coordination, shared funding. It will result in less duplication of effort. And most importantly, it will help identify partnerships. So, if you find an overlap between, say, NOAA and University of Wisconsin, that they're looking for the same mapping data in the same area, this study can make it really easy to identify where these partnership opportunities exist. And that helps us support the goal of filling the mapping gaps within the Great Lakes. So the priorities tool is how we gather that information. It's an online application. You can see the screenshot of the application here. And it was developed by Ken Buja over at the National Centers for Coastal and Ocean Science using Web App Builder for ArcGIS. It's like a grid-based system. So when you go into the application, you'll see this grid here. which helps you select the areas of interest, the priorities that your organization might be interested in. And so how it works is that different stakeholder organizations that participate in the study nominate a respondent or multiple respondents who then make individual selections within the application, which you can see here. This is the application that they'd be filling out. They just select grid cells out of this application and tell us some information about them. From there, we analyze and combine those grid cell responses, those submissions, in order to look for overlaps, opportunities where there might be shared mapping interests. So this study this framework has been done in several other regions of the US already, including some parts of the Great Lakes. In particular, it's been done on the West Coast from the states of California to Washington. It's been done in coastal Alaska. It's been done in Florida, in the Southeast. And there were also 2 smaller scale studies conducted in the Great Lakes a few years ago, one in the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary and one in another national marine sanctuary, which I don't think has a name yet. But so this framework has been done in multiple areas of the country and has made it a lot easier for different organizations across all levels of government and outside of government to help identify their mapping interests and find partnerships. Here's just a screenshot of some other places where the study has been launched. On the right is Southeast US from North Carolina to Georgia, and then on the left is a map of the regions for the Florida study. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the results of the Great Lakes study. So this is a regional rollout of the spatial priority study that covered all 5 Great Lakes, US and Canada. For the Great Lakes study, we had 38 organizations participating. We surveyed them in winter of 2020 and 2021. And we surveyed states, provinces, academia, US federal agencies, Native American tribes and First Nations, and a number of other groups. So we wanted to get as broad a response as possible so that we could really capture where different groups are looking for mapping information throughout this region. So the questions that we asked are, what are the most high priority or urgent areas? Where do multiple organizations have mapping need? And where do they need the same type of data? Because remember I was saying before how, we're not just talking about bathymetry. We're talking about water column, we're talking about substrate, we're talking about, samples. And so one of the most important things to identify here when we're looking for partnerships is, of course, are they looking for the same type of data? Because then there's a real partnership opportunity there. So that was one thing that we looked at in the results in order to see where these partnerships might exist. So here's just some data about the participants that we had for this study. Participants were allowed to enter data in all 5 lakes of the participants and of the lakes that were sampled. For Lake Michigan, Erie, and Superior, 15 organizations, 15 participants entered data in these lakes, not necessarily the same 15. And then for Lake Ontario, there were 12, and for Lake Huron, there were 9. And so this does affect the results a little bit because we did normalize them based on the varying numbers of organizations who responded per lake. So we'll see that effect in the Lake Superior data shortly, since Lake Superior had more participants than other lakes. And we also decided to look at how many organizations, how many participants entered data in multiple lakes. Since many of the organizations that we surveyed were regional, statewide, province-wide organizations, many of them only had interests in 1 or 2 lakes. And you can see that in this pie chart here. Of the 38 participants, 21 of them only had interests in 1 lake, representing about 57% of our survey respondents. About 8 of them had interests in 2 lakes, representing about 22% of the respondents. And then from there, the number continues to shrink. Of the 2 organizations that entered data in all 5 lakes, both of them were US federal agencies, which is not surprising. But the large spread across multiple lakes, as you can see here, there were a large number of organizations and participants in each lake, even if some of them only had interests in 1 lake, mean that there are still many partnership opportunities across all 5 lakes. And I guess before I continue, a note about participants, which also affected the results. Between the US and Canada, the US had 28 respondents, and Canada had 10. So of course we had a much larger response from US agencies. And part of that just comes from the fact that I work for a US agency, our coordinator worked for a US agency. And so we know more contacts on this side of the border. But we did try to normalize the response to account for that. So you'll also see that in the results. If you are curious about who participated, I won't read out the whole list now, but I can share it later. So from here, I'm going to show some maps of some of our results. The first one is a map of high priority areas across Lake Superior. The key is showing how many organizations identified the cell, this little square grid cell, which is 10 by 10 kilometers, as a priority area. And what we defined as high priority for the participants was, do they need mapping data within 1 to 2 years? So if the answer was yes, they would mark it as a high priority and it show up on this map here. So you can see that there are the high priority areas are concentrated coastally, which is definitely not surprising. In Lake Superior and Lake Huron, priorities were concentrated in St. Joseph Channel and Whitefish Bay. And you can also see high interest in the northern coast of Wisconsin, including Chequamegon Bay. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce that very well, but I'm trying my best. But so lots of interest in this area. Actually, this area here in northern Wisconsin was one of the highest interest areas throughout the entire Great Lakes, not just Lake Superior. So like when you look at the full map, it lights up along with Green Bay as one of the highest interest areas in the Great Lakes. So among our participants, a large number of them identified this area as an urgent mapping need for them. And you'll notice that some of this area is actually already mapped. When I'll pull back this map right here. Some of this area in Lake Superior here in pink is actually already mapped, but it is of high environmental interest to a number of agencies and organizations. So a lot of people are trying to make sure that their mapping data is current, that it is refreshed frequently, and that they're covering more areas of this lake that haven't been already mapped. But from here, Xiaofan over at Gloss normalized some of the data to account for some of the biases as far as the country respondents. I talked earlier about how we had 28 respondents for the US and 10 for Canada. And so Xiaofan normalized this data to help us see, when you take out the US bias, where do the Lake Superior interests concentrate? And you'll notice that along the southern coast of Ontario, that lights up as a high priority once it's normalized. Our theory on why this occurs is that there is a lot more unity between Canadian agencies about where their mapping interests are. So when it comes to the Canadian agencies that responded, they had a lot of similar mapping interests, where among the US agencies, the interests were much more varied. So when it was normalized by country, because the Canadian respondents had more overlaps and similarities in where they were interested, this area lit up. That's a great opportunity for people looking to map in this area, as it means that there are a number of Canadian organizations and also American organizations who are interested in that area. And then we also normalized it by lake. This was also done by Xiaofan. So remember how I noted earlier that there were 15 participants, 15 organizations for Lake Superior. And then same for Lake Erie and Lake Michigan, but only 12 for Ontario and 9 for Huron. So that data was normalized just to get a balance of throughout the Great Lakes, if you're comparing all the lakes like on equal footing, where the most mapping interest is. And since Lake Superior had more participants than other lakes, when it was normalized, the high priority value went down a little bit, but you see the same areas identified as a high interest. From there, we also decided to look at any priority value. So when participants entered the application, they were able to select from 3 different priority values, technically 4. They were able to say, is it high priority, medium priority, low priority, or none? The default was none, which didn't mean they never need mapping data there. It just means that they don't need it within 10 years. And we put limits on how high or how many cells could go into each bin, just to make sure people were actually prioritizing the space. And so because of that, we decided to take a look at the any priority value, which identifies whether a cell was identified as a priority at all. So whether it was identified as high, whether it was identified as medium, whether it was identified as low. Because the thinking is, if a organization identifies an area as low priority and another one identifies it as high, but they have the same mapping area, they have the same mapping interest, that's still a great partnership opportunity. So we wanted to look at what might light up when some of the urgency is taken out. So the map is showing how many organizations identified a cell as any priority at all. And you can see that some of the same areas light up as before, which is not surprising. In Lake Superior, much of the northern Wisconsin coastline is still a priority, as well as much of the Minnesota coastline. But you can see that coastal areas are very significant throughout this region, representing a lot of ecological, environmental, navigational concerns and challenges that people are looking to address. And like before, this area was actually one of the highest, or one of the, I should say, there were the most overlaps here and in Green Bay throughout the entire Great Lakes. So like when you look at the entire Great Lakes map, this area along with Green Bay light up the brightest as areas with the highest number of organizations interested in mapping their period. So, if you're a mapping organization that's looking for partners in this area, you are probably going to find a lot of potential partners throughout Lake Superior, especially along the Wisconsin coast. Like before, this was normalized by country just to take some of the US bias out. And like before, you can see a lot of the Canadian coastline light up. But the Wisconsin coastline is still very bright with lots of priority interest, even when you remove the US bias in the results. So that's an interesting note. That was also done by Chaufin over at Gloss. And then again, it was also normalized by lake to take some of the bias towards the lakes with large number of participants out of the sample. That makes the priority indicator look a little dimmer over Lake Superior. But of course, if you're looking for, mapping partners throughout Lake Superior, there's still a lot of areas where you might have opportunities. From there, we decided to look at some other data from the results. So when participants put their responses into the study, they didn't just tell us what priority level they were interested in. They also told us what justification, what their reason was for mapping this area. And we collected this to kind of get an idea of what different interests there were across the Great Lakes, what variation there was, et cetera. And so from here, you can see a number of interesting trends. I've highlighted Lake Superior at the bottom, and you can see some variation compared to the other lakes. For example, for the Great Lakes as a whole, the most commonly selected justifications was habitat, biota, and natural area, with almost 30% of this region given this reason for mapping. But other popular justifications included benthic exploration, commercial fishing, scientific research. But there's a lot of justification variance across all of the lakes. There are a lot of different reasons that people were looking for mapping data. Sometimes when we do these studies, like the entire spread is dominated by like 3 justifications, but you don't see that here. There's a lot of different reasons why people are looking for mapping data throughout the Great Lakes. Lake Superior specifically has pretty varied mapping interests that in some way reflects that of the Great Lakes as a whole, but there's somewhat higher interest in monitoring as measured by justification frequency. And you can also see some other differences in this chart, which I can go into in more detail if you want. But in the interest of time, I will proceed to the next one, which is map product frequency. So remember earlier I was saying that one thing we're trying to ask is, where do multiple organizations need the same type of data? That's a really good opportunity for collaboration. So we asked them what type of data they were looking for. That's honestly the most important question that they were asked in the application, even though we looked at priority levels and other things. And the reason we did this is to ensure that not only are we getting a good idea of which map products and data needs are actually being requested across the region, but where can the most effective partnerships be leveraged. So like I said before, we're not just interested in bathymetry, although elevation bathymetry topography was a very high interest map product throughout the Great Lakes with over 25% of respondents throughout the Great Lakes as a whole choosing this as their map product that they were requesting. There's a lot of variation. We let people choose from a variety of map products, which you can see in the key, magnetometer, biological samples, habitat map, backscatter, photograph, substrate, all sorts of things. And they could pick more than one too, because a lot of people are looking for multiple types of data. So they could pick up to 3. And so from there, you can see a huge amount of variation in the map products that were requested throughout the Great Lakes. Throughout the Great Lakes as a whole, the most requested map products by frequency included elevation, substrate, and habitat map, which represented the majority of all responses, but not like it didn't like dominate the spread. I don't think you still see quite a large variation with other map products becoming visible in this chart. Lake Superior saw higher interest in backscatter intensity and photographs, videos, imagery than the Great Lakes as a whole, but slightly lower interest in substrate and sub-bottom. However, Lake Superior has such a variety of map products that, again, if you're looking for mapping partners in this region, even if you're looking for a map product that doesn't have like a huge plot on this chart, chances are that there are still partners out there who would be willing to collaborate with you on it. So then I'll talk about the main use that we envision for this data and how different participants and non-participants can leverage this data in order to help meet their mapping needs and fill the gaps. Like I said before, our main goal is to identify mapping partnerships and to identify these overlaps. So while the previous data is really good at getting an idea of sort of the demographics and the general geographic distribution of Great Lakes data and Great Lakes mapping interests, what we're really looking for is how can we identify partnerships? And that's where our US mapping coordination site comes in. I'll drop a link in the chat once I'm done presenting. But this makes it really easy to identify where you might be able to find mapping partnerships throughout this region. You can also download the data. So if you like what you see on the site and you think it could be really useful for either identifying partnerships or other analyses, definitely let me know and I can send it your way, both the results that I showed in the previous slides and the original submission data from each participant. So how would you use this data? You would go to the US coordination site and all you would do is scroll down to the subheading Spatial Priority Study Great Lakes. And that shows the analysis layers, which I just showed you, as well as the base grid layers, the submission layers from each organization for the Great Lakes Spatial Priority Study. At the top, you'll see a layer called Overlap Analysis June 2021. And what that is basically it's a simplified overlaps of all the different priorities that each organization identified, along with information about what map product they're looking for and what organization the priority area came from. And so this makes it really easy to look at different overlaps throughout the region and possibly find mapping partners. If you don't see an organization here, that means they did not submit a response for the study. We contacted at least 150 something participants across at least 100 organizations. Some of them were going to participate, and then because of the timing of the study, they weren't able to. So if you're expecting to see an organization here and you don't find it, that might be why. Because we did this study in the middle of the COVID pandemic, a lot of people had conflicting obligations, and so that limited some organizations' ability to respond. Just a heads up on that. So what you would do is you would turn on the overlap analysis layer by just clicking the checkbox here. And from there, the simplified layer will come up, identifying all of the different priority areas that were identified for each organization. So then you can just click on wherever your area of interest might be. For here, I've just clicked on this area in northern Wisconsin. And you can see a number of information in the pop-up that will follow. So the red highlighted polygon identifies the priority from a specific organization. That organization is identified in the pop-up in the row office. So for here, you can see it's the NOAA Office of Coastal Management. And you can also see in the pop-up the number of organizations that have a priority in that area you just clicked. So in the area that I clicked, which is the area that was coming up as such a high priority among many organizations in the results from earlier, there are 5 organizations that have mapping interests here. So it's quite a large number of potential partners already. From there, you can also see what map products they requested. So for NOAA OCM, they were looking for bathymetry, backscatter, and photographs videos, and imagery. So if you're a mapping entity, even if you didn't participate in the study, if you're interested in mapping this area, there's a potential point of contact there. You can also scroll through the pop-ups using the sort of right-facing triangle at the blue bar of the top pop-up window. Not sure if you can see my clicker. I'm kind of circling it, but maybe that's not visible. But you can see that right-facing triangle, and you just click it, and then it will show you the next potential partner in this area. So that is the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, if I'm remembering that acronym correctly. And they're also interested in bathymetry, but they're as well as bathymetry, they're also interested in substrate and habitat map. So because the Indian FWC and the NOAA OCM have a shared mapping interest in this area of bathymetry, that's already one potential partnership right here that can help both groups meet their mapping goals. From there, you could just keep scrolling through these pop-ups, looking at the different organizations who've identified mapping interests here. Below, I've taken a screenshot of 2 more pop-ups and highlighted the office name in red and the products that they were interested in yellow. So you can see a number of different partnership opportunities. Just skimming this, the USGS is also looking at backscatter and bathymetry and substrate, which I believe the Great Lakes Indian FWC was also looking at substrate. So lots of potential partnership opportunities here. And that's the main goal of this data, is to identify these partners so that different groups can get their mapping needs met. So the importance of this, it allows for better opportunities for mapping coordination. It improves opportunities for leveraging funding. You know, if you're a small agency that doesn't have a lot of funding, but you see an opportunity to partner with an agency that has lots of funding, that's a great way to get mapping needs met at little cost. It improves opportunities for working together, especially across the border, because there are a lot of places where US agencies and Canadian agencies have the same mapping interests. And it allows disparate organizations to work together in conjunction with mapping goals. Our next steps, as far as these studies are concerned, we're planning to launch these studies for other regional groups. Right now, we've got one study ongoing in Alaska, and we have another one ongoing in the Mid-Atlantic states. And our long-term goal is to be able to run this for the interior. So if you're watching this and you are more interested in like coastal and maybe interior mapping, this study does cover coastal mapping to a degree, as you can see by the map here. There were a number of groups that were interested in like coastal mapping as far as like habitats, ecology, navigation are concerned. But we do plan on moving this into the interior states and into terrestrial areas in the future, including in the Great Lakes. And then my contact information is here. I'll drop my email in the chat, as well as the C-Sketch website link, the website that is here, once I'm done presenting. I'm open to any questions you might have, and if you want to shoot me an email, if you want data access to be able to, you know, manipulate in ArcGIS, just let me know and I can definitely send that your way. Thank you so much for letting me present today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn my camera back on and pray that my computer doesn't explode. We're all in this together.
Thank you so much, Karen. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Hey,
great. So just a reminder, folks, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'm also going to change my view to gallery. So if you have a hand raised using that reaction hand raise option, I can call on folks in the order that I see them raise their hand. I know I have a lot of questions. Let's see, not seeing now. I hope I may have made the mistake, Karen, of putting the link to the coordination site in the chat. So I'm sure there's folks who are now exploring it. Which may be a distraction, but yeah, I thought that might prompt some additional question. So I have one, which is that, are you, because you mentioned expanding this to other areas, are you still looking for input or from Lake Superior? Like if there's somebody who says, oh, like, you know, there's sometimes staff turnover or an organization might not be represented, is there still a way to participate, or is it kind of a set overlapping need set right now?
Thanks. That's a great question. So we plan to rerun these studies for each region every 3 to 5 years. So if an organization is interested in participating but wasn't able to participate this time, we definitely love to have them for the next round of input. So if there's anyone now who is interested in participating in the next round, you can let me know now. Or you have my email and you're more than welcome to reach out.
Okay. That's exciting to know this will keep going. And then this is maybe showing that I haven't explored the data in super detail, but when you see what groups prioritized different needs, is there a point of contact there, like a recommended person, individual to, like if folks want to collaborate, is there a way they can link to someone specific? Is there more just like organizational level, which is a great start. I was just curious if there's named names.
Yeah. Yeah, so we don't put names on the site, partly for privacy reasons and partly because, with turnover, you might be emailing someone who would have left like 6 months ago. I have my contact information on the pop-ups on the C-Sketch site. So if you are like interested, I can connect you with the people who participated in the study.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see.
Let me pull up the C-Sketch link real quick.
Yep, and I can follow up folks who might not be quick copy pasters or whatnot. I can share the links with everyone who registered today. And this is obviously being recorded. We'll put this on I'll put it on the Lake Superior Collaborative YouTube page in case any of you want to rewatch it or have collaborators or colleagues that might want to check this out. Let's see, Nicole has a question. Thanks for the great presentation, first of all. And then it says, definitely a useful tool to have for the higher priority areas on the Wisconsin coast. Were there a disproportionately high number of Wisconsin organizations that responded?
Thanks, Nicole. That's a great question. I can actually pull up the result or the number of the participants right now. I don't think that there was a disproportionate number of Wisconsin participants. On the US side, we had respondents from a lot of different states. Sorry, I'm checking my work computer because that has the notes. I'm unfortunately not allowed to use Zoom on that computer, so I have Zoom up on this computer, which is why I'm going
the
back
joys
and forth.
of working for
I know
agencies.
I know. Okay, so for Wisconsin, we had 2 organizations, the Department of Natural Resources and the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program. And then we also had the University of Wisconsin Sea Grant. So that wasn't, for each state, we had at least 1 organization represented, usually like 2 or 3. So I don't think that it was necessarily disproportionate for Wisconsin. I just think there was a ton of interest in this area, which is really cool to look at.
Okay, thank you. And I recommend folks explore the website. I know when I first saw Karen's presentation, I kind of poked around, and I think sometimes exploring the tools is a helpful way to see what's there. It's probably a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Let's see, any hands raised?
So a heads up about the link. This might just be happening to me because I'm on the Zoom browser. When I click it, it redirects to like the main C-Sketch page instead of the mapping page. So if you're interested in going to our website, what I would do is open another tab and then just paste that link in directly. And then that will take you to the IOCM website where the results are. Not sure why Zoom is doing that. It just likes to make things weird for me.
Yeah, and the link I shared might be broken in the way it went into the chat. But
no,
again,
your link was correct.
Oh, okay. Because I can, like I said, I'll follow up with everyone who registered, but thanks for pointing that out. Another question from Elizabeth. Let's see. How did you consider habitat types, such as coastal wetlands, when polling potential collaborators or map products?
Thank you, Elizabeth. So we just asked people from a general perspective. One of our map products was a habitat map. So regardless of what kind of habitat, if they were interested in looking in habitat data, then that was a map product that they could select. Our understanding of it is that when partners are identified, if two groups are interested in mapping habitat, at that point when they're like sort of discussing the scope of their project and what area they want to cover and stuff like that, they would be able to discuss like what kinds of habitats they're mapping and what they're interested in looking in. And it definitely is possible at that stage that they might be looking at completely different things, and it might not be like a useful partnership. But even if they're looking at slightly different data, like being able to share like ship time and like resources can still be really helpful, especially for smaller organizations.
Okay, so if I'm understanding right, like the survey didn't dig down into specific types of habitat. It was more like the higher level. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Good questions. I know I have more, but I don't want to just ask you all my own questions. Okay, not seeing any. Feel free to add those to the chat, folks, or you can raise your hand and unmute.
One thing I can
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no worries. One thing that I guess I can point out while we're waiting on questions is if you want to see each organization's specific response, you can see that on the C-Sketch website. I can share the screen really quickly just to show y'all that. So here we are on our mapping coordination site. If you scroll down to where the Great Lakes subheading is, and you open the folder base grids, that's all of the submission layers. So you can see all of the organizations who responded. And from there, you could zoom in and identify where different organizations have mapping needs and see where different groups had mapping interests. So for example, if I click USGS, you can see here on the site the different areas that they identified as a priority, with hotter colors representing high priority. Red is high, orange is medium, and yellow is low. And so that can also be really useful when you're looking at partnerships, as you can dig deeper into the data and look at what different groups are identifying in different regions.
Thank you so much for pointing that out. That's really, really helpful. And oh, Lacey, would you be willing to unmute and explain this? I think it warrants yeah, I think it's a good thing to talk about today. If you're willing, putting you on the spot. Oh, I can't hear you.
I think you might be muted.
So I asked Lacey if she can to talk about this because yeah, I think you might be there now. No, oh no, it's okay. Yeah, anyways, you can all read her message in the chat, but feedback on an updated habitat map is welcome and definitely relates to that piece about getting into more detailed habitat types. It's all right.
I'm sorry, Lacey.
Do you want to are you a good contact for that, Lacey? If you want to put your email in the chat. Thank you. I know there's a lot of folks on this that probably would be able to provide great feedback on that. I guess this is more of a background study related question, but I was wondering if, since it seemed like you first developed this as an ocean tool, were there any adjustments that were made to the Great Lakes, or were the questions that were asked kind of at a higher enough level that you didn't feel it was necessary to sort of like change or adapt it?
So we kept a lot of things similar, but we did make some changes. One thing that participants are asked, which I didn't go into too much in the study or in the presentation, but one thing that they're asked is what like legislative, executive, or program drivers might be motivating their mapping interest, which could be like executive orders, acts of Congress, or just like other priorities at the state level. So we did add several to the application that were relating to the Great Lakes specifically. I think as far as justifications and map products are concerned, those stayed fairly consistent since they could be applied to both the Great Lakes and the oceans at like a higher level.
Okay, thank you. Still not seeing anything, but there's people on, so I feel like people still might be interested in what you have to say.
Y'all are obviously more than welcome to email me if you want data access or if you have questions after the fact or what have you. Especially if you have specific questions about like participants and things like that, I'd be happy to provide more detail on that.
I was wondering if you have any examples, and it doesn't have to be from the Great Lakes, but maybe in some of the areas where this has been established already, examples of how people have actually put this into use to coordinate with each other, or maybe that's not that piece isn't kind of in your purview, but I'm kind of curious if you have any like great examples of how this is, you laid out why it's useful, but I'm curious if you have any specific examples of how different organizations have used it.
Yeah, so for the Great Lakes, we don't have any yet just because the results of the study were only posted about 3 months ago. But for some of the older studies, particularly in the West Coast, there were mapping missions that were organized based on the results of the study. One of them was in Washington State. There were some offshore areas that were identified as high interest among multiple organizations. And so those were mapped by the NOAA ship Rainier in 2017, if I'm recalling correctly. So depending on the organizations that are involved and the resources that they have, for several of the previous studies that have been launched for other regions, they have led to shared mapping efforts.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Okay, well, thanks. So yeah, this is kind of like hot off the presses, I guess. So it makes sense that maybe you're still trying to get the word out and just let people know this is available. So that's great. Thank you so much for being here. Obviously, folks, you don't have to stick around if you have more questions. We do have Karen until noon Central Time. But otherwise, yeah, feel free to hop off. But if you want to unmute and ask some questions here in the last 10 or so minutes, yeah, we can stick around. Otherwise, if there's none, we can all go have a little midday respite. You get extra 13 minutes in your life. Thank you all. And I'll be following up with an evaluation too. I forgot to put that in the chat, but I'll share that with everybody after the fact.
Thank you so much for hosting and